Hi, Arthur.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Tezos Explained. And we're going to talk about upgrades. When I've learned that Tezos is self-operatable and self-amendment protocol, that blew my mind, actually. It's a very important aspect of Tezos ecosystem. What's behind the idea of self-amending protocol?
The original idea stemmed from looking around innovation and Bitcoin around 2013, 2014. There's an explosion of innovations, ideas around smart contracts, around privacy, around proof of stake. So clearly, a lot of really interesting topics. And Bitcoin has none of that. And at the time, there was different narratives around Bitcoin. And one of the narratives that was very prevalent is that, look, you don't have to worry about any of these altcoins. If they ever invent anything useful, it can just go into Bitcoin. And then in 2014, you can start seeing a change. They go from, we'll incorporate them as they're valuable to, well, none of them are valuable. And in fact, they're bad. And it was justified in part by saying, look, if we just let Bitcoin be upgraded willy-nilly, then people can do social attacks on it. They can push for some changes, and who's going to decide anything? So they have this idea of rough consensus, right? And this idea also of governance by forking. Governance by forking is less common in Bitcoin. I think it's other blockchains that say we'll fork, and then that's a form of governance. And the idea that you get any meaningful governance from forking is wrong, right? If a chain forks, you're not going to just pick the branch you like. You're going to pick the branch that everyone else is going to pick. And so the person who determines, or the group who determines, the winning fork, it can be a very, very small group. It's just whoever controls the shelling point. It could be a stablecoin issuer, it could be an exchange, it could be a single core development team. And so I found that the criticism from the Bitcoin perspective was very valid. You didn't want this type of governance. You didn't want this. So how do you solve this? And, simple answer is say, well, chains are good at forming consensus. Let's have a consensus on the chain for the change. And let's go all the way. We're not going to just say we'll kind of agree on chain and then we'll do the fork or anything like that. 100% automated. So that when a decision is made on chain, the chain upgrades itself. You don't have to do anything because that introduces another possibility for human subjectivity. No, the upgrade just happens on a chain. And Tezos is the one chain that does that. So, it gets over-the-air upgrades. Another comparison I would give to people very early on is that almost every software today has auto upgrades. Whether it's your phone operating system, your operating system, your browsers, they all auto upgrade. But that also causes a security issue because how do you know that the upgrade is valid? And in a centralized world, it's simple. It's going to be signed by the vendor. How do you do that in a decentralized ecosystem? And that's the answer. The answer is you do it by a governance procedure, and the chain itself carries the witness that this is a valid upgrade and you should follow it. So that's the impetus behind Tezos.
So how the very first upgrade looked like?
So the very first upgrade was Athens. They were so early on, the chain was in a beta stage. There were some forks to fix a few early quirks. I think the voting code wasn't fully activated. So that's the first couple of months. And then shortly after that, we wanted to test, let's do an upgrade. So it was a small upgrade. It was a reduction of the size of roles, which were an accounting mechanism for tracking your stake on a network. And so there were two variants of it, Athens A and Athens B. That was also a way of testing the first part of the governance protocol, which lets you choose between multiple potential upgrades. Sometimes people look at this first phase as if it's kind of like a phase to indicate preferences for protocol. And that's a mistake. That's not what it's for. If you didn't have this phase, people could just spam the chain by constantly having another sending protocol. So you need to have this in case there's contention between protocols, but it's not meant to be a menu. But in that case, it was a menu. Athens A and Athens B, and so one was selected, and then the upgrade was passed with a quorum met and all of that. So that was the first demonstration, and the upgrade happened over the year.
So what changed for the governance process itself since Athens?
There was some simplification. There was some reduction in the length of the cycle. There was a change as well in how the quorum threshold were computed. They were based on a moving average of past participation. Yeah. So it can't be lower than 50%, but it's kind of targets based on the past average. There's been also a activation phase. So after the protocol is completely accepted, you have a period of time before it actually goes into effect, which gives you some security benefits. You don't want to have block reorganizations around a protocol boundary, right? Because then you could reorganize and say, the protocol passes, doesn't pass, especially if the vote is closed. Yeah. So it's good to have this buffer period. And also, out of principle, I didn't want to do development work for the next protocol until it was 100% sure that it was going to pass. So that also gives the time to prepare for it. So there's this period of time where you know there's a new protocol activating, but it hasn't activated yet.
And it's fully automated, fully on-chain governance.
Yeah. Anyone can produce an upgrade, and that's the most important part.
Yeah, and that makes Tezos an extremely unique piece of software that technically is bringing to life the philosophy of freedom. Yeah, and
absolutely. Some of the upgrades recently, like Rio, for example, is changing the size of cycles.
Yeah,
that's the thing where that's easy to get something wrong. Like you get an off by one error, and then the chain thinks it's in the previous cycle, but it's in the next cycle, and then you can't produce any block, and then your chain stalls. Because there's always a little bit of a stress.
Yeah.
But the past few upgrades, really nothing happened, right? It's just like one block, it's your protocol, and then the next block is a new protocol. But yes, there's a few core teams that they get together to watch the upgrade, and I having like a watch party in general, like maybe on like Twitch or YouTube for people who want to see the upgrade happen live would be fun.
There's a lot of things to celebrate, so maybe let's have a little overview on Rio.
I mean, so there's a couple of things in Rio. One was a simplification of cycles to last only 1 day, as opposed to like 2.7 days. There's two main consequences to that. One is that it reduces the time to unstake a lot, I think down from like 11 days to 4 days, something like that. It also easier to communicate things. When people say like, oh, a cycle 2.7, the fact that it aligns makes things a lot more predictable. And of course, now the DAL is incentivized, which means, the DAL is really coming, which should allow us to increase the throughput a lot on rollups like Etherlink, Mac Justice, and others which are coming.
I'm super happy that the upgrades, we call them with like series names. I'm very curious about what will happen when we're going to reach the end of Alphabet.
Yeah, I'm open to ideas. Let's hear what people have to suggest. The question is, do we do other cities? Or do we do something else than cities? If we do cities, there was a tendency to want older cities. Maybe we focus more on modern cities for the next thing. Or not cities, there's other option. For a while, there was a proposal to name the working proposals, to name them after cheeses.
Okay.
But I like cities. If it were just up to me, I would just resume cities. But we'll get a sense of like what people would be excited by. Yeah, I mean, planets, stars, elements.
There's a lot of things we can make a good use of.
Looping is a good option.
Yeah. Thinking ahead, the core of everything is, of course, Tezos L1. And what we would like to see that will benefit Tezos X and overall vision.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the work going on at the moment around the L1, there's quite a bit around consolidating the consensus. So introducing BLS keys, so that we can have all bakers participate at every block to increase the economic finality of the protocol, using BLS signature to aggregate. So that would also reduce the overhead of each block. So that's one aspect. Reducing the latency, that's ongoing work. It's been going down a lot, but I think you can go down probably to 3 or 5 seconds without really changing the trade-offs in terms of decentralization of the network. You want to go below 3 or 5, you start changing a little bit how you do consensus, so then it's a different discussion. But for now, I think like going from like 10 seconds to 3 or 4 seconds doable. What else? This is a cross between the L2 and the L1, which is supporting RISC-V instructions. I don't know if that's L2 work or L1 work. Big improvements in the UX of transactions. So we're looking to get rid of counters for transaction, which is super useful for wallets. So if you don't have a counter for your transaction, you can send a bunch of transactions without waiting, right? Because right now you send a transaction and then you can't send another transaction until the next block. It doesn't work very well. So you should be able to make way more transaction without having to wait, which I think is a good improvement. A lot of quality of life improvements on the L1. They're small things, but which can affect all of users.
I think the key here is the flexibility of the protocol itself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure, like always. Thank you so much.
Likewise.